Welcome, everyone. As we're letting everyone in, we wanted to share with you some fun music. Welcome for joining us for the Fundraising Masterclass. We have some fun background music as everyone's making their way in. If you haven't heard Strong Girl, it's our new favorite song with the ladies for the Fundraising Masterclass. So thank you. Feel free to put in the chat message where you're coming in from and what SDGs you're working on. Great. All right, we're going to move on and have our background music come down. Thank you all for joining us for the last of the Fundraising Masterclass series. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here once again, and we have our dream team coming back to do our last session. And we know that everyone is a fundraiser in your organization. We want to make sure that we instill that in our teams. So whether it's you as the CEO or the executive director of your social venture, the fundraising team, but also your board members, getting them to help us fundraise, all the way down to our interns. They're going to be in person. They're going to be meeting folks. They're going to be having these conversations. We want them to be thinking like a fundraiser. So everyone's a fundraiser. We'd love for you all to put your cameras on. We are super interactive in this session, so we love to see your beautiful faces as we get going. And also a couple of reminders that we're going to put in the chat. So we will have some Q&A time. You will be able to add things into the chat. One thing that's important for us is be sure to put in the chat right now, where are you calling in from, and also what SDG you're working on. So we'd love to hear from all of you and where you're calling in from. So I'm going to pass it on to our co-presenters today, and they're going to introduce one another. So I'm passing it on to Natalie and Lisa.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Debbie, and welcome everyone. It's thrilling to be here. I love this community so much, and it's always an honor to teach. So very grateful that Lisa and I got invited to share with you today. And Lisa and I decided to introduce each other versus Debbie introducing us, because we've been kind of like fangirling on each other for a while without actually getting to spend much time together. So this was an incredible opportunity to collaborate. So the best part, actually, I will say, of preparing the webinar was sleuthing and more on Lisa, and also just being in relationship. So she's someone I've admired for a long time, but didn't know well. And so through this process, I got to know Lisa's heart on a couple of levels. One, her love of the sector and serving inspiring leaders with outstanding fundraising, coaching. And also her deep love of supporting all those around her, including contributing to children and families in need via fostering children, which can be risky and fraught, but she and her family persevere with so much grit, so much love in serving these kids. And I also want to call out her love of learning with the degrees from prestigious institutions in peace studies and conflict resolution, political science and government, a JD in law and international relations studies, and she's currently pursuing an executive master's of nonprofit administration at the University of Notre Dame. So in short, Lisa has a heart for humanity and the brain power to get things done on behalf of those she cares for, including and especially leaders like you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thanks, Debbie, for introing us. Thanks to the Catalyst 2030 team for inviting us to come be with you all today. I'm really excited to introduce everyone to Natalie. I'm not sure that she needs an introduction. I suspect most people in this room know her or know of her. Natalie, to me, is one of those people I heard about for years and years. And it really was through this Catalyst 2030 community that we got to know each other. And I think it just speaks to the value of what Catalyst 2030 is doing right now and bringing people together to have these really important discussions. Natalie brings a really unique vantage point to this conversation and really to any fundraising conversation because she's a philanthropist herself, and she devotes her time to helping NGOs build fundraising capacity and strategy. She works tirelessly to uplift our sector. She's always working to build community, to make connections, and doing public speaking engagements. She's always working to introduce people and organizations to each other who can do more and go further together. So Natalie and I are really excited today to talk to you guys about the idea that everybody's a fundraiser. Often when we talk about fundraising in our sector, we think about what we would kind of call like our frontline fundraisers, those who are out having the conversations and making the asks. But today, our hope is to focus on how we can incorporate other members of our team or other people in our community to help us in our efforts to raise more money, to mobilize more resources. So we're happy to have you all with us today. Natalie.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Great. So I will launch in. The session is about an hour. There's wiggle room for 15 minutes for added Q&A and things along those lines. But where we're going to jump in is the self-ID exercise. So we'll put in chat kind of the self-ID form, but this is something that I developed many, many years ago when I was serving on the board of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. And it has served me and the sector and leaders we serve very, very well as well. Because what I found in board meetings, and I was, always tasked with chairing the fundraising committee. But when it would be time for me to present in the board meetings about the fundraising status, how we can, engage them and more, it was, there was always a group of people who wanted to hide under the table during those discussions, who were terrified of being asked to fundraise. So I crafted something that was, we're all fundraisers, but it's around mindset and how you're a fundraiser. So I created this framework around askers, connectors, and nurturers. And the truth is, there is so much gold in loving your funders, and the nurturers are the first ones to hide under the table during fundraising discussions, and yet they're so incredibly valuable. Oh my gosh, I can only see myself on the screen. I'm going to block that. Actually, I would love to see everyone because I love the energetic exchange. And if folks want to pin me, please do. But I love the energy of this group, and it's a lot more than having feedback of just me, which I have 24 hours a day anyway. So yeah, so to do with how are you a fundraiser? So when I would do board retreats, what would happen is would go and the same thing, the board, most boards, you have a subset of askers, connectors, and nurturers. And so one of the very first things I would do to make the walls go down on being able to receive the rest of the day's training is putting them in terms of their understanding how they're a fundraiser. And so the nurturers could be easier and then take in the trainings. So we'll I don't know if the self-ID has been put in the chat yet, the form, and there's also a more expanded blog. Great. So I would encourage you to click on that. So really gaining clarity around a dominant type enables you as the primary fundraiser, or maybe there's folks on your team who are in this as well, interns, board members, other stakeholders. So it enables you to stretch the boundaries of the comfort zone without getting completely into unnatural territory. And it also enables the development staff to quarterback the staff, the board, the allies most effectively in roles that maximize their unique strengths. So and the thing about fundraising is no one really got into this space because they like to ask for money, but it is in fact so core to what we do. And so the thing about callings, and let's face it, we're all called to this sector, we're called to this work. Callings call for us to grow into them. So we don't have everything we need to fulfill the calling when we begin. The calling asks of us to expand, to stretch, to challenge our our comfort zones. We're meant to grow into cultivating qualities that enabled us to show up fully expressed and fully able to pursue and get that North Star goal over the finish line, but particularly around fundraising. So if that's an edge, it's meant to be expanded to help fulfill that calling. So with the self-ID, I'll just go quickly through this. We have so much content to cover today. And I also hopefully in the chat, or it will be, is the full expanded blog beyond the worksheet, because a lot of what I'm sharing, I also tend to write it out so that the materials can be plug and play and cut and pasted, but plug and play. So, so askers, the askers in your group, I'm curious to know if you would, actually, I would love for you to just take 30 seconds, truly, you're all three types, but which is your dominant? So just take a few moments and whatever jumps out at you first, don't overthink it. You can try to clean it up later, but my guess is your gut's gonna lead you to the right answer. So just kind of go through that, and I'd love for you to put in chat what your dominant type is. But the ask, the personality, someone very self-assured, charming, success-oriented, resourceful, assertive, decisive. May show preference for introversion. I feel as though I am all of these things, including humble, haha. But I'm actually an introvert. So it's not, yes, can show a preference for extroversion or ambiversion. But that is sort of that personality, that ability to be assertive, to ask for what you want. And so also I pulled this from the Enneagram. I don't know if you guys have ever done the Enneagram. It's amazing. Don't do the free one, do the $12 one. It takes you 30 minutes and it's like someone lived with you for a year and then wrote up a full report. It's uncannily accurate. So this was extrapolated from the Enneagram. So askers, self-accepting, authentic, role models who inspire others. And so this personality profile is actually really powerful as an asker. And then there are the connectors. The connectors have a very important role in fundraising. So natural connectors are like, oh, you are so powerful about that. You care so deeply about this. You have to know my other friend who knows, who cares about this. Why I think you should meet is this. And then just getting them together to create high alchemy together. But that's sort of a natural inclination. I find connectors actually showed up on the planet that way. It can also be cultivated, but optimistic, versatile, playful, practical. You delight in connecting others. You delight in focusing talents in worthwhile areas, cross-fertilizing areas of interest. And, the Enneagram examples of this type is Dalai Lama, JFK, Amelia Earhart. So it's also nice to kind of anchor into like, oh, I'm like this, I'm like the Dalai Lama as a connector. Isn't that, and it's like, yes, you can like actually wear that or evolve into it. And then nurturers, this is the part where, as I said, nurturers are the first ones to dive under the table during fundraising conversations at board meetings or staff meetings. But my goodness, they're so much gold in loving your funders, and who better, especially nurturers on the board or things along those lines. So empathetic, sincere, warm-hearted, unselfish, altruistic. Nurturers also can naturally lead with curiosity, pulling others into the conversation. So it's not necessarily an explicit ask, but it's a way to understand the funder's heart in a way that makes them feel more deeply engaged. And there's a choreography to that. And in fact, I wrote a blog called Strengthening Funder Relationships. And this is the perfect perfect role for someone who is a highly relational nurturer. And so I'll go there. And then in the blog, I won't go into this too much, but I created openers and asks based upon these different styles. And, for example, askers, my core, like in my case, SDG 5, equality is my personal philanthropy. So my core belief is the future hinges upon a more just and gender balanced world. I'm doing what I can to bring this to life within our lifetimes, and I'd love to talk with you about what that looks like. So that's a pretty soft one. I also, in the Crafting Your Why section, I talk about when our deepest passions often spring from our deepest wounds. So when I talk about then, why is that my core belief, and why does it matter, and what's at stake? But and then going into connectors, going into, again, what are some openers? What are some asks? Nurturers. A lot of times there's so much discomfort in making an ask, even for all of the types. And what I found to be really, really powerful when I'm coaching leaders like you is, if you are terrified, then that's 100% authentic. You can set yourself free and the other person or other people in the group free by naming it. You can say, this is the part that makes me feel so uncomfortable, but it's the most sacred part of my role on the board. It's the most sacred part of my role in this organization. So I'm going to take a deep breath and do it anyway. And who wouldn't lean in for that? And how great that you named it, that you can go through it clunky and it's endearing and it's authentic. And it's like, wow, am I in love with you yet? And also it's sort of like, oh gosh, how do I rescue you from your discomfort? So even nurturers and that discomfort can be an asset if it's authentic. So I will now just close out there, and I'm really excited to go into chat to see how people landed. But in the interest of time, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Lisa.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And Catalyst 2030 team, if you could pull up the slides, that would be wonderful. The concentric circle slides. So you guys, the way Natalie and I kind of prepared today's presentation is that we would look at fundraising and team fundraising from a few different angles and share with you a few different mental models. So they're not meant to connect perfectly, but just to share with you a few different ways that you might approach fundraising with your team and with your community. So Natalie just shared, emboldening your team and your community by helping people self-identify what type of values or skill set they could bring as an asker or a nurturer or a connector. I'm going to share with you right now a mental model that we use where I work at For Impact to think about team fundraising and how we can incorporate and fold in different members of our team. So, I'm sharing with you right now a graphic that we use to show team fundraising. Now, there's a word on this graphic that might kind of jump off the screen at you. And if any of you have been to our trainings, you won't be surprised, but you see the word sales on here. You see a core sales team, a sales support. Let me tell you why we sometimes talk about sales as fundraising. It turns out that the sales sector or the discipline of sales has many great characteristics that translate perfectly over to fundraising, and that we in our sector, our social sector, could use to bring in more resources. A few of those things. Salespeople are often out of the office and having conversations. Now, in this day and age, being on Zoom or being on WhatsApp and having conversations is perfectly adequate, right? But we have a focus on being external facing and having conversations. Good salespeople are focused on building relationships. And I think the word sales is cringy for a lot of people because probably most of us on this call have had an encounter with a bad salesperson who's kind of trying to, sell you something you don't need, right? But the best salespeople are trying to find a right-sized solution for your problem. So in our world of resource mobilization, that could be that there's a foundation out there who has a mandate to fund a community-based organization in Malawi doing X work. That might be their problem, that they need to find this community-based organization, and we might be that community-based organization. So we're out building relationships and trying to help find a solution for a problem. Salespeople often have a master prospect list where they've kind of rated and ranked their potential funders. There's a focus on prospects. There's a process behind it, a repeatable process that other team members can join. And there's a focus on metrics, right? There's a focus on metrics, and that we'll have goals and we'll try to reach those goals. So all that being said, if the word sales, if you have an aversion to it or you don't like it, just replace that word with fundraising. Okay, so just replace that word with fundraising, and I'm just fine with that. But this my friends, is a visual representation of how we can work together to increase our funding results. So we think of 3 roles that people can play. There's probably more. This is an oversimplification, but I think it's a great first step as we think about how to engage our team and our community in our fundraising efforts. So I'm going to start in the middle. We call these people our green team. All right. This is our core sales team or our core fundraising team. This is when I started off, I said, what we think about when we think about fundraising, we think about our people who are out there making the asks. These are our frontline fundraisers. So that is our green team, the people whose job is to go out and make asks. Now, for a lot of organizations we work with, they're small teams. So you're not going to have someone who's only a fundraiser. You're the program person, the fundraiser, and the founder. All right, that's fine. I don't mean to say that your green team needs to only be a green team person. I just want to share that somebody's going to be wearing that green team hat when they're out there trying to raise funds. All right, let's focus on the red team, our support team, our fundraising support or our sales support person. This is an often overlooked role in the field of fundraising. We often meet with and hear from organizations and leaders who are trying to expand their fundraising capacity, and they immediately go to hire green team people. All right, so they immediately want to hire green team people. And what we often say is, do you have enough red team support? These are the people who are supporting the green team and uplifting the green team and getting the green team ready to be out making the asks and having the conversations. So this includes all support work. Who is doing the research? Who is finding the funders? Who is identifying leads? Who is running a prospect list? So if we are, I would say a best practice, and I think Natalie would agree, is to have a list of all of our potential funders. Who's the one saying, oh, line 13 is X Foundation. What's the next step with X Foundation? Line 2 on our Excel is a certain corporation. What's the next step there? So this support team are the ones who are keeping the train on the tracks, identifying new leads, doing the research, sometimes doing the scheduling, all right, doing all of the work that goes on behind the scenes. Now, it's great if your organization can hire someone to be that red team member or even a couple people, depending on the size of your organization. But the reality of the situation is that's often not the case. All right. So oftentimes your green team is also the red team, and that's fine. I think it's just important to realize that there are 2 different roles and you might be playing a different role at a different time. Also, it's great to pull in other people to be red team members. I often get the chance to talk with leaders who say, like, the board wants to help with fundraising, but they don't really know how to plug in, or I don't know how to engage my board around fundraising. Asking the board to help with some of this red team work is a huge value add, I would say, especially young board members who are hungry to get an education in this space. If these board members can help you with some of the research, some of the lead identification, some of the strategizing behind how are we going to get to this funder, that's a great role for board members. Also a great role for interns. I often have leaders that I am lucky to meet with, and they say, I've got this intern, I don't know what to do with them. Like, I'm gonna have to keep them busy for the summer. So this is also a great role for interns. I will share later, we have kind of a description of red team members and what they can do. All right. So I want you to think outside the box. I want to encourage everybody to think outside the box when it comes to the red team and who might wear that hat at different times. Okay, last I want to talk about the blue team. This is actually my favorite team. These are our natural partners. All right, these are the natural partners. Sometimes I think, Natalie, I think I maybe heard you say our allies who can help us sometimes to get a visit, can help us on the visit, or can help us in follow-up after a visit to actually secure the funding. Natural partners, you can see on this visual, we've got some of them listed there. Maybe it's those that we serve, maybe it's our clients, maybe it's community members, board members, the founder. I mean, really, the sky is the limit when it comes to who might be on our blue team. This is a chance for us as our organization's leaders to really incorporate other voices into the story we're telling. And it gives us the chance to share the story of our organization and share its impact. This is a defined role. That is one tip I would give. If you're going to bring a blue team member into a conversation or a follow-up email or something, I would ask them, can you share your experience as X, Y, or Z? So it's not just a hodgepodge of a bunch of people together, but we're giving them or asking them to fill a defined role. I'm going to share a few examples of how I have seen Blue team members really elevate an organization in its fundraising efforts. First, I want to share the story. I was reading in the chat where everyone's calling from. I saw a lot of people from Kenya. I am lucky to work with this really incredible organization in Kenya called Zana Africa. And they work to provide girls with the tools they need to safely navigate puberty. One of the many tools that they offer is this comic book series that provides a reproductive health education in a really tricky way, because they're comics. They're not those like boring reproductive health books that probably all of us on this call had to muster through. And so they have these beautiful comics that follow the life of an adolescent girl. And what we did during COVID, we held a virtual event. I think probably a lot of people on here have been to these virtual events or held them yourself. And we invited the illustrator who has drawn these comic books to come on to the call and show us how she draws the characters in the comic book, but also to tell us about her creative process. And it was so magical. She set up her tablet to the Zoom call and sketched the main character in these comics. Her name is Nia. And the illustrator talked about how when she first created Nia, she wanted her to be relatable for young girls in Kenya. So she made her school uniform a little dirty at the end of the day. Her hair was a little disheveled. Her socks were a little bit slouched. Like, she wanted girls to look at her and see themselves in her. And what she does is she goes out into the field and field tests Nia. And all of these girls say, we don't like that. We want her to be a higher version of ourselves. We want to aspire to be this girl. So as she's drawing this comic, she's like showing how she makes her socks up tight and her uniform perfectly white. Long story short, we have a bunch of funders in this virtual meeting. And no asks were made in this call, but we used that illustrator as a member of the Blue team to almost get ready for an ask that was made down the road. We also recorded her drawing so that we could use it later on down the road. So she was a Blue team member that we folded into our fundraising process. Also, I work with this amazing organization, a really small community-based organization in Malawi that works to eliminate childhood marriage. They had a call with a funder 4 months ago, and they asked a government official to join the call. Now, sometimes that's easier than others, depending on what country you're operating in and things like that. But this government official was able to share with the funder the difference he has seen in his community since this organization has set up shop there. All right, that is folding in a Blue team member. And that government official was happy to do it because more funding to that organization leads to better outcomes for everybody. All right, one last example I'll share. Natalie shared that my family, we serve as a foster family. And I don't know if that translates across cultures, but essentially if there are at-risk youth where I live in the United States whose parents, for a plethora of reasons, are unable to care for them, we are able to live with these children until their parents can get them back. And I foster through a nonprofit. All right, our nonprofit maintains our license and helps us with everything that we need. And recently, the director of this nonprofit said, we just got this gift from an individual who earmarked the gift for continuing education for foster families. Would you mind writing him a thank you note? And I can speak firsthand to how much education I need. I don't think anything prepares anyone for the amount of trauma that we see. And so I wrote this. It took me 5 minutes. I wrote a thank you note to this funder and said how important the continuing education was for us in our efforts to work with these youth. And I dropped it in the mail, and she called 2 weeks later and said, what did you write in that letter? Because he sent another gift after receiving it. It wasn't even meant to fundraise. I was simply following up. So this, guys, is how we can kind of incorporate these Blue team members into our fundraising efforts. I can speak firsthand regarding that fostering example. I was delighted that she asked me to do this. And I suspect most people in your communities would also be delighted if you ask them to either help you get a visit, join a visit, and share your experience, or help with that follow-up. Because the work you all are doing matters to so many people. So if anyone can kind of come in and help uplift that work, I think they would be really happy to. So as you're thinking about everyone's a fundraiser, how can I fold different people in? I encourage you to think about who's on your green team, who's on your red team, who's on your blue team. Oftentimes somebody will be on all three, and that's okay. That's what we see all the time. But just kind of being aware of these different teams when it comes to fundraising, I think can help you maximize the different people that you're working with and alongside and for, in order to bring in hopefully greater funding results. Let me stop there. I just talked for a long time. So we can hold questions till the end, or I'll check chat too if anyone has anything that they just got to get off right away. I'd be happy to answer a question right now too before Natalie takes back over.
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can put it in the chat as well. Robin, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yes, wonderful. I'm intrigued by using the blue circle and specifically board members. I've done some fundraising and sales for development organizations, and sometimes there is some hesitation from board members to really step in. Certainly if it involves fundraising or business development. How do you go about that? What kind of tips would you have for us?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I think the question is so good and so rich. And I think it's a question that 98% of leaders in the sector have. How do we engage our board and how do we get them involved? I think, and Natalie, I'll pause too to let you jump in, but I think Natalie's framework where a board member can identify as an asker, a nurturer, or connector is huge. Like she said, it takes down those walls and board members can see that they don't need to be out making asks, or they don't need to be asking their friends for money. I think that's what board members are terrified of, that we're going to ask them to ask their friends for money. And I think that's like a terrifying thing for them to think about. I also think, Robin, if we can give a board member a really specific role or purpose in this fundraising dance that we do, where we can ask them to lend their voice, I will take care of the ask. If you can, help share our work, here's the way you can tell our story. I think the more specific we can get with them in asking for their help, I think we can often activate them much better. I think when we simply tell the board we need help with fundraising, it becomes something that's like too insurmountable, too hard, too scary, too lofty. So if we talk to a board member specifically and even sit with them one-on-one and share with them what it is we're trying to do and what we're trying to do with fundraising, and maybe come to them with a few specific asks about how they could help us, I think we'll go a lot further. Natalie, you should jump into though. I'm sure you have.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I agree 100% with everything that Lisa had shared. And I think a big part of it as well is, to Lisa's point, how well you quarterback them, give them, within their stretching their comfort zone a bit or within their comfort zone, but then quarterbacking them in a way that it's actionable, that they can execute, that you can circle back in a way that can be very, very supportive. So they're on the board because they care deeply about the mission. And so, but we all get in our own way of serving that mission with the stories we tell ourselves. I'm not good at this. My friends are going to stop taking my calls or whatever it is, but there's a way to invite folks into that. So again, there is a choreography to it. And happy to answer more questions to do with that question at the end with the time permitting. The other thing too is that, and this is a good segue into the next piece, unless there are more questions to do with that topic. Well, and there's time at the end as well. So, but what dovetails with Lisa's segment is to do with also helping them come alive in why they care about this work in the first place, right? So the organization all has their why and their how and what's at stake and all of these things. And that's so important, that engagement pitch. But each of the people who come into that board meeting also have their very unique personal why they care about that mission. And so I created this Crafting Your Why framework because many years ago I was working with a client who was an intellectual giant. The organization was doing such powerful work, hard data, fantastic track record, and more. But he lived from a place of neck up. And so he was having a hard time connecting meaningfully with funders being so data-driven. And going back to Lisa's segment about you can bring in someone who's data-driven, but you also want to have someone who can be who can be an ally based upon what that funder profile might look like, that funder avatar. But in order to help get him to drop from neck up to neck down, I interviewed him. I interviewed him with a series of questions that made him drop more and more into heart space over the course of the interview. And then I mean, that was bespoke to him, but then I ended up creating, we're open source. Anything we do for a client, we pretty much try to make it available to the sector as well. And so created this crafting your why with that framework. There are men, like when I do board retreats, there are men on the board who maybe can't drop into that heart space as easily. So there's created a workaround question, like what frustrates you the most about blank? So they can access frustration, but maybe not access other parts that are more emotionally textured. So I think in chat, that worksheet of crafting your why is being dropped in. And so the point of it is to enable you to speak from the heart and with passion and give you conversational openers that are compelling, reveal your heart and ferocity for achieving the goal. They're also meant to be accessible and bite-sized. You can use it at a gala or at lunch meetings or informal gatherings. Or if you're in a funder meeting and you can introduce something where it's like, maybe intuition is telling you it's not going the way you want, and you can drop into, you know why this matters so much to me? Or you know what I feel is so at stake? You know what so frustrates me about this and why I'm so grateful we're in this meeting? So you have these bite-sized openers in a way that are really meant to allow yourself to be seen as caring as deeply for the work as they do, and inviting them into the conversation in a meaningful way as well. And one of the areas where I see a lot of emotion is around the stories of impact that most touch my heart. There's a lot of like coming alive. It's the story of, like if Nia from the illustration fame was an actual girl, like the arc of her story. So, but also this is personally significantly because ... So many of us come to this work because we care so deeply because it's personal. And I referenced earlier, our deepest passions often spring from our deepest wounds. And with my folks being on SDG 5 and equality, there's a ferocity, there's a not on my watch warriorship around that. It comes from that original wounded place, but also from a place of wanting a very different experience for my daughter. And what that helps do, and I feel into it, I'll wade into it, or if it's someone that's been a long-term supporter of an organization that also works in SDG 5, it's like, these are some of the stories of why I care so deeply. This is, in my personal journey, what inspires you to be so deeply invested? So by my sharing my story of why I care so deeply, it's an invitation for others to then share their heart. And now you're having this neck down conversation that is so resonant and meaningful and goes far beyond the transaction. And you're truly coming alive, and funders want to be allied with organizations and leaders and allies who come alive in the work and know that they're in it for the long haul. When you share, this is why it matters to me, and this is what's at stake, and that level of ferocity, it's just so in your tone of voice and your energy field, they know this isn't a transaction. You're in it to be on their journey together, and you're discerning, with curiosity, is this ours to do together? But clearly both, or you and the group, care deeply about the mission. So sharing that heart is an invitation for them to go into why they feel serving the mission is their theirs to do, whether they're an existing funder, but they took a meeting in the first place with you and what the issue area you're working on. And the question could be, what inspired you to say yes to talking about, X mission? Really, well, what is it in your personal story that would lead you to care so deeply about that? So I want to take a minute now to go into that crafting your why. And so just pulling out a couple of the questions, choose one or the other. You'll only have a minute, so just do it ugly. Just get the impressions, get what's coming up for you in your heart, just down. So the first question would be to choose from: the mission of my organization is personally significant to me because. And then another question is, what makes me most come alive in this work is. So we'll give 60 seconds and then we'll swoosh you off into breakout rooms and give you the chance to be able to articulate your personal why. So we'll start the clock. And then Debbie, do you want to pop back in about a minute? To
Yep.
breakout? Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, you should plan some music.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, in board meetings, when I have board members share their personal why, like you're all at the board table, because you care about the mission, but what is it that got you there? And they all come from so many different reasons. And it's incredibly deep and rich and bonding for the board to understand the heart of each other and then get down to work. We did this in our team meeting, our team retreat 2 months ago. I'd never filled the form out myself. It was awesome. It was actually really
Awesome.
I filled out the whole form. It was really cool. I don't know why it took me 8 years to do it.
All right. So we are now putting you into your breakout rooms, and you only have about 5 minutes or so in that room. So get started. You got the 2 questions. You can ask: the mission of my organization is personally significant to me because, or what makes me most come alive in the work we're serving. So go ahead and go into those breakout rooms, sharing in those breakout rooms. We appreciate that you shared how you felt and what excited you in this important work. If you weren't able to share in your breakout room because of audio or something, feel free to put what you came up with in the chat, and I'll hand it back to the ladies.
I read mail outputs. So I read.
Mhm.
Yes, I read.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know how I was automatically on mute.
Yeah.
I was saying that I wish I could be in all of those breakout rooms. It was really fascinating to me. And when we do board retreats, what I find was very often the very first answer is still neck up, is still kind of intellectual. So then we'll work on, well, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? So it's easy to get into the, how the work is achieved, but what's at stake? And is there something in your personal journey that would lead you to care so deeply? Or what was the moment when you realized this was uniquely yours to do? So looking for emotional texture, sort of that aha moment. Again, like we all are, like the how we do it is so important, but why we do it as an organization, but why we do it as humans is also incredibly important when we're in these human to human relationships. So, so I encourage you, if you didn't drop down straight away, that's totally normal. Take a few more runs at it. Like, well, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? And with that, I will have Lisa take it away.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I love talking about the why as well, because I think what it does is it helps everybody involved with our organization realize they have something of value to add in fundraising efforts. And that's just simply sharing their why they care, why they're there, why, they associate themselves with this organization. And it instantly makes everybody a fundraiser, And if we just expand what we think of when we think of that word fundraiser, And I hope you can share this with your teams and your allies. If we just expand what we think of, that we don't necessarily need to be the ones out asking, can you come in at $500 this year? We don't need to be the ones out asking that, but by just being out, engaging people around our organization's why and getting individuals ready for a funding conversation, we are then in a place where everybody's a fundraiser. So I love that. Thank you so much, Natalie. Okay, can we go back to the slides again, guys? We're kind of toggling back and forth quite a bit. Great. So I last shared with everybody team fundraising. We talked about the green team, the red team, the blue team, and how we can kind of think about who to pull in on different teams with different funders. It's always going to be a customized approach really to funders. I'm going to present another framework that's side by side. It's just another way to look at fundraising. And when Natalie and I were prepping for this course, we kind of landed on this idea that I'm really excited to explore. And that's, let's think about our funder avatars or the funder personas. And we can kind of approach it almost backwards planning. When we know we have a funder that we are trying to reach, let's think about what that funder is especially like or interested in, or what we know about them. And then we can think about what team members to pull in that fundraising effort, in that resource mobilization effort. So this is a framework, how we can incorporate people in our universe into our funding effort. So we're going to start with that funder. Now, a good practice, I think, is when our organization has identified a funder that is aligned to our organization. And everybody, when I'm talking about funders today, I'm casting a really wide net. I'm talking about foundations, corporations, individuals. I'm talking about institutions like governments. All right, I'm talking wide breadth of a funder. When we think about that and we have identified a funder who we believe is aligned and a good funder for our organization, a best practice is to do some research on that funder. I'm going to drop, in the chat right now, a pretty generic, but I think helpful worksheet that we use. It's called a knowledge base. Let me just grab my chat and I hope this will open. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll find a different format of it. This is a very, very basic knowledge base for impact. When we work with organizations and we are working on a funder strategy, one of the first things we'll do is fill out this knowledge base. Now, if you all like it, I'd encourage you to make it your own and add parts to it that you think would be helpful. Add other questions or other points of data collection, but we're going to look at background information on this funder. All right, what do they care about? What is their giving history? If not to our organization, to other organizations. So we're going to kind of do a background research. Ideally, your team would have a place where you can kind of keep these knowledge bases. Okay, so by doing a knowledge base or something similar, we are going to learn about this funder. All right, we're going to learn about the quirks. We're going to notice a pattern in giving. So we're going to first do this background research. And Debbie, could you pull back up those slides, please? And what I want to do then, once we've done this bit of research, I want to think about what are some funder personas we might see. We might notice that a funder is very data-driven. And I suspect a lot of people in this room have had funders that are very data-driven, that want to hear about the numbers and the impact metrics. If we know a funder to be data-driven because of our research beforehand, or even through conversation with that funder, we might think about bringing somebody to the call who can answer some of those questions around M&E, or who can talk to that data. Now, if we don't have someone there right then, let's pretend like we go blindly into a funder conversation and we learn right away that they are really like a data wonk, and that's what they're going to want to talk about. We can answer questions to the best of our ability. And then we can always say, I'd really love to schedule another call so I can pull in our M&E person, or so I can pull in, another foundation that collected M&E on us. Like, there's so many different ways we could go about it. So know that we have more than one bite at that apple. I don't know if that's an expression that translates across cultures. Let me say it a different way. We have another chance, right? It's not like we have that one call, and if we blow it, we blow it. No, we can say, can we talk again? And I'll pull another person in. Okay. So that is one funder persona that we see that's data-driven. Another that we see are people who are kind of emotionally driven and who are feelers. And you usually know this by conversation. You'll hear that coming from them. Sometimes you'll see on I'm just going to pull some examples out of my head, but a family foundation, you'll be on their family foundation website and you'll get that feel that they're very emotionally connected to the work they do. If that's the case and you're trying to strategize that funder visit, you might think about pulling in one of your clients, one of the social entrepreneurs you have put through an incubator, one of the students that's gone to your school, or a student's parent. You know, there's a lot of, I won't delve into all of the issues with kids. We can have a whole nother call on that, but maybe the parents or the teachers at the school or something like that. So if we have an emotionally driven funder, let's think about who can we pull into this conversation? Whose voice can we elevate to really help this funder get it, to help them say, leave that call and say, I get it. I get what you're doing. Another persona is a gatekeeper. And I see this a lot in my work, that there's somebody who's kind of sitting at the front door of a funder. It's often with a foundation or with family offices at a bank or even with a corporation. It's that CSR person at that corporation, right? Who's sitting as that gatekeeper. Who can we pull into the conversation to help that get past that gatekeeper to the decision maker? I often find pulling in a founder, pulling in a CEO or an executive director of the organization, sometimes pulling in a board chair can help in that conversation. But I think my takeaway for you all is that there's not a one size fits all answer to the question, how do I get past the gatekeeper? My takeaway I hope to share with you all is, if you know you're going to be speaking to a gatekeeper, be strategic about who you bring to that call. Think through, who can I bring? You know, I almost think of these funder conversations like you're driving a bus, and who can you pull, like who can you stop and get onto the bus, and what seat should they sit into? Okay, what seat should they sit? So I would say with gatekeepers, let's think about who can help us open that gate. There are funders who really value recognition. It's the reality that I see. There are some out there. And if we believe it's someone who really values the recognition, who might help make that person feel important? All right. I think this is maybe a good time. The reason I'm pausing here is I'm thinking this is probably should be addressed here. I want to be really careful, and I know Natalie is with me 100%. We've had this conversation, the way that we're talking about funders. When these people who want to feel very important, I don't want to create by any way, shape, or form, or indicate that there needs to be this power dynamic that we need to feed into. I don't want to play that game. I don't want any of you to be playing that game. There is inherent bias that's been in philanthropy since the beginning of time. And my team, Natalie's team, the Catalyst 2030 team, we are working every day to change that. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we're trying to help organizations raise a lot of money so that they can keep their doors open and serve more people. So we're in two tracks. We're trying to, fix the system and help amazing organizations and leaders. So when I talk about somebody who values recognition and maybe pull in a certain person for that conversation, I hope that doesn't offend anybody. I see us all, when we are fundraising, as being equal partners. Sure, this entity is bringing money to the table, but you know what we're all bringing to the table? A boatload of impact, a boatload of achieving these SDGs. We are bringing the real work to the table. None of these funders can do what you all are doing. And I believe that in the bottom of my heart. Nobody can set up shop in Malawi and make the inroads that are needed in this moment of great crisis. You alone can do that. That's what you bring to the table. The funder brings to the table the money, but it is an equal, symbiotic relationship. So I hope when I share that if we've got someone with an ego, maybe bring in somebody that can help feed that ego, that is kind of, we're doing the systems change, and we are trying to raise money to have impact right now. I think everybody can do it in a way that feels authentic and organic and, ethical to them. So I hope that makes sense. I'll read chats later. And I'm happy to talk to anyone at any time about this. This is what I wake up thinking about. It's what I go to sleep thinking about. One other funder persona, I think, is somebody who's very financially savvy, who really wants to get into the books and know about the money. And I think when we're preparing for those calls and those conversations, perhaps bring your accounting person, your CFO, your board treasurer, if you have one. So my big takeaway, I just shared a few examples. My big takeaway is, as you're prepping to have funder conversations, and this is both, in the emails leading up to the call and to the follow-up, as you're prepping for those, I think if you can think about what type of funder is this, what is their funder avatar, their funder persona, and who might I bring to the table to help kind of push the conversation along, that's a really great way to go about this. One last thing I want to share, this is both with thinking through the funding avatars and thinking through our team fundraising model with those circles. As you are incorporating Blue team members into your visits and into your communications, but especially in your visits, I would do the work beforehand to make sure that everybody has a role on a certain call and they know what their role is. Oftentimes we talk about if there's multiple people on a funding call, to think about there being like a ball. And so let's pretend like I'm the green team member and I might say, I'm going to be the visit lead. There should be one visit lead, I think, is a best practice, somebody to kind of drive the conversation. But after we talk about this, Fiona, I'm going to pass the ball to you to talk about, this workshop that you recently ran and about the impact and about how the funds really help take that workshop to the next level. And then you pass the ball back to me. So my advice here is to be strategic. When you fold Blue members in, give them a role to play. Of course, they can answer any questions and things like that, but not have just kind of a free-for-all conversation, and kind of think about this ball that you're passing back and forth amongst your team members. So you guys, that is the conclusion of Natalie's and my prepared content. I see a question here I'm going to get to in just a sec. So a couple even, and Natalie, maybe you jump in as well. I think for the remainder of our time together, we're here for Q&A, or it doesn't have to be a question. A comment is great. A challenge is great. We appreciate and accept all. So I wonder, should we just start at the top here? It looks like Hermela. Yeah. How do we determine who to put in the core team and the support team, especially in our small team setup? Yeah, how do we decide who's on the green team, who's on the red team? I don't think there's a formula I can share with you that fits every organization. Especially with small teams, you're probably all going to be on multiple teams. Red team members, their characteristics, they're usually great at project management. They're great at processes. They're great at kind of pushing things along and keeping projects on track. Green team members are generally really good at communication, really good at relationship building, really kind of fearless when it comes to going out and having funder conversations. So I think from one point of view, you look at people's skill sets, comfort levels, what they want to do, right? Because we want to retain good people in our organizations. And then from another point of view, you look at bandwidth. I mean, that's the reality, especially for small teams. And that's mostly who I work with, is small teams. So if we've got a program manager, right, who we're asking to help us with fundraising, how much time do they have a week, a month to give? Do they have the ability to manage relationships? If they don't, let's put them probably on the red team and ask them to spend, 5 hours a week or a month doing some lead identification. So I think I look at bandwidth and natural skill set. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And actually, there were so many incredible questions that were submitted in advance. So and one of the things that I found going through, I don't know, there were 90 questions. It was actually pretty extraordinary. Actually, many comments. But one of the things that I noticed were a lot of the questions, Catalyst 2030 in other learning series or other webinars have gone very deep into those areas. And I'll put in chat our fundraising handbook, which I think some of the Catalyst 2030 sessions are now in there. It's going to go in there or not. Or if I have that ability.
I'll take care of it for you.
Okay. Well, I mean, so some of the questions that were in advance was how can we create solid relationships that survive hardship? So we referenced strengthening funder relationships blog. How can we effectively fundraise in a period of economic crisis? You know, there are some things in that as well during COVID era, which of course was a period of economic and health crisis and more. And I will say COVID became more and more about developing and maintaining relationships for the future while funders work to meet the challenge with their existing grantees. It doesn't mean you stop fundraising, but it might look different, understanding if the world is completely on fire, like in that scenario. But again, it's deepening those funder relationships and having that strong base. And that's where, to the point of this session, it's pulling in allies who can help you on that journey, like the nurturers and more, if they're already existing funders. How do you turn failures into opportunities? There's a blog on what to do if your NGOs decline funding, which is all about opportunity. It's just a no, not now, but there's so much richness to learn, and under what circumstances would it, would we be invited back? And so again, more choreography there. So I'll stop but as I said, so many of the questions were already addressed in that and in the Catalyst 2030 sessions as well. I'll see if there are any other questions that are coming up about some of the things I just touched upon.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Natalie. Here we've got a question: how to deal with funding fatigue among funders. It's a question we hear a lot. I think this is going to be really unsatisfying, and I'm sorry to tell you, I don't have like a magic bullet answer that will just be really clarifying for you. But with so many of these questions around funders and even like being rejected by a funder, it really comes back to having conversations with funders and engaging them. And even back to where I was 10 minutes ago about this being an equal partnership. If it is an equal partnership, and it is, then if we're feeling funder fatigue, it would be great if we could talk about that with them. How are you feeling right now? And what is, what's happening with you, and how are you feeling like your investments have been in our organization? I mean, I think the best way to deal with it is to talk about it. We want clarity. I think one of the hardest things for fundraisers and organizations in our sector is not knowing where our funders are, if they're going to come in the next year, or especially if we're really dependent on one or two funders, which is true for probably almost everyone in this room. And so sometimes having that conversation around funder fatigue, we leave that conversation with clarity, and we might even know we need to go find some new leads. We're going to have to kind of replace some funding here. So I don't know how to deal with it other than to talk about it and to keep the conversation fresh. So if you're going back to a funder year after year, make sure you're sharing and engaging around your impact each year, and that you're keeping the conversation new and fresh.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's really, really powerful advice. HBR, her business review, wrote an article, I think it was like 2016, but I still reference it, where it says the pitch is dead, long live the conversation. And I know For Impact has this framework. We certainly have the impact, the framework around leading the donor dance. There's a choreography: lead with curiosity, be in that conversation, as Lisa said, being in relationship. And then you have that level of rapport where you can go into real talk. And you can even bring it up in a way that is, more and more post-COVID, we're hearing about funder fatigue. Like if the indicators are all there, and it's like, then you can name it. Like, tell me how you're feeling about, we've had such extraordinary impact together on this powerful journey. And yet this is also something that happens with funders after a number of years, particularly post-COVID. Are you open to having that conversation? Well, now you've just brought it into the light. What's more dangerous is not bringing it into the light. So naming it, being able to have that deep conversation, also develops such a powerful level of trust, and kind of a recommittal, like, wow, this is really a leader I care deeply about. We did a session on becoming big bettable at one point, where we talked about the leadership qualities, and we sort of named some of these things. So just kind of echoing what Lisa was sharing as well, around just being willing and going into brave space to have those conversations.
Yeah, I once worked with an organization that had that conversation with a funder, and the person said, I also have fundraising fatigue. It turned into like this beautiful conversation about how I don't actually love fundraising, but I do it because, and you can imagine what followed, all the reasons they do it. And so it actually turned into, a deep relationship based on shared values and impact instead of, a transactional relationship.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think we need to, because I'm looking at time that just flew. So Debbie, do you want to take it away? I know we have more to cover and I want to respect everyone's time as well.
Great. Yes. So we will share in the chat all the information and we will follow up with a lovely email with all the resources that have been shared in the chat. I want to bring note to two things we shared: the fundraising handbook that Black Fox Philanthropy created. We also have a short resource guide that we started with our fundraising masterclass series. And there is a great running crowdsourced document that we started. It hasn't been developed due to time, but I think what we're hoping is everyone puts in the donors, even if they're donors that they're not working with, so that people can see, look at all these organizations and where they're working in the world and what they're interested in. So that crowdsourced documents also in the chat, and we'll share it with you in the follow-up along with the video. Two things that are coming up here on the Well-Being Mental Health Awareness Month. Natalie and Lisa said, hey, we need to bring this to the table. We know we were all maxed out. We know we need to take care of ourselves and our self and taking care of our team as well. So protect your asset is what Natalie loves to say. So one series is coming up with the mental health collaborations team, Beyond Toughing It Out, a conversation on mental health and social change workplace. That's being run by the Mental Health Collaboration. They also have a couple of articles in SSIR that they published about this. The Wellbeing Project, if you're not familiar with them, we'll put their information in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out to the Wellbeing Project and hear and attend some of their seminars and resources as well. And lastly, there's a blog from Burnout to Bliss, a 2021 Wellness Hub from the Skoll Foundation that we're happy for you to take a look at as well. I'm sure we're all needing a pause in life at this moment. So I encourage all of you to take a moment after this meeting to pause, take a breath, appreciate the time that we got to spend with Natalie and with Lisa today. I want to launch the poll real quickly. We do a quick little survey, excuse me, that we'd love for you to fill out. It's just our way to talk about these series and make sure that we have the opportunity to continue during this series. So love to have your feedback there. 2 quick questions, only takes a moment or two. As we're finishing up, we'll put in the chat the contact information for Natalie and Lisa. They're happy to have you reach out to them. And Natalie, excuse me, as she says, has a ton of resources on the Black Fox Philanthropy website. And because they're not able to take on everyone as clients, they put in all their learnings into documents that they share open source with everyone. So feel free to access all of those. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for the entire series. I hope you learned a lot. We will also put in the chat in the email when we follow up the previous fundraising masterclass learning series, so you can see some of the history and background in that as well. Thank you once again. We appreciate all your time. Unmute, say your goodbyes to Natalie and Lisa. Thank you. You can say it in your negative language as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, dankjewel.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.